remove distractions, and rebuild your inner strength. The modern world is not short on information, stimulation, or opinion. It is short on stillness. The mind is rarely allowed to rest in itself. Attention is pulled outward from morning until night, fractured into fragments that never fully settle. Over time, this does not merely exhaust us, it reshapes us. It trains the mind to react instead of judge, to seek relief instead of truth, to confuse motion with progress. Stoic philosophy begins from a simple observation: a weakened mind cannot live well, not because it lacks intelligence, but because it lacks command over itself. Inner strength is not loud or dramatic. It is the quiet capacity to remain steady when pressure is applied, to choose reason over impulse, and to act in accordance with one's values, regardless of noise, praise, or blame. Distraction erodes this capacity slowly. It teaches the mind to avoid discomfort rather than examine it. It replaces reflection with stimulation and substitutes constant reaction for deliberate choice. Many people sense this erosion, but misidentify the cause. They blame work, relationships, politics, or fate, when the deeper issue is a scattered inner life. The Stoics did not face smartphones or endless media feeds, but they understood the human tendency to flee from the present moment. They warned that a person who cannot govern their attention cannot govern their life. To live well, they taught, one must first learn to stand firm within oneself. This is not a call to escape the world or reject modern life. It is a call to remove what weakens you so that what is already strong can reassert itself. Inner strength is not built by accumulation. It is rebuilt by subtraction. What follows is not motivation or comfort. It is an invitation to clarity, discipline, and steadiness in a world that profits from your distraction. Distraction is not neutral. It is not merely a background condition of modern life. It shapes how the mind moves, what it values, and what it becomes capable of enduring. A distracted mind is easily disturbed, easily offended, easily frightened. It seeks relief before understanding and comfort, before truth. Over time, it loses the ability to remain with difficulty long enough to learn from it. The Stoics understood this dynamic through their teaching on impressions. Every moment, the mind receives impressions from the world. These impressions are not commands, they are invitations. Between the impression and your response lies judgment. That space is where freedom lives. Distraction collapses that space. It rushes judgment. It trains the mind to accept impressions unexamined, to feel first and think later, or not at all. When attention is constantly pulled outward, the mind becomes reactive. News, opinions, images, and comparisons arrive faster than reason can process them. The result is not awareness, but agitation. People mistake this agitation for engagement with life. When it is closer to dependency, they are not choosing what matters. They are being chosen. Seneca warned that a person who is everywhere is nowhere. He was not speaking of physical travel alone, but of the wandering mind, a mind that cannot remain with a single task. A single thought or a single value becomes shallow, not because it lacks depth by nature, but because it never stays long enough to reach it. Modern distractions amplify desire without direction. They show you endless lives you are not living, endless outcomes you cannot control, endless standards you did not choose. The mind responds by grasping, comparing, resenting, and fearing. None of this strengthens character. It weakens it by tying self-worth to external noise. Stoicism teaches that desire must be disciplined, not indulged. Desire, when left unmanaged, does not make life richer. It makes it restless. A distracted person is always slightly dissatisfied, always waiting for the next stimulus to bring relief. This creates a subtle form of slavery, not to a tyrant, but to appetite. Consider anger. Anger thrives in a distracted mind because it feeds on incomplete understanding. A headline, a comment, a fragment of information triggers a judgment of offense or injustice before reason has time to intervene. The Stoics did not deny injustice exists. They insisted that anger makes us less capable of responding to it wisely. Distraction fuels anger by denying the mind the pause it needs to choose restraint. Anxiety follows the same pattern. Anxiety is not simply fear of the future. It is fear combined with imagination, unchecked by reason. A distracted mind jumps ahead constantly, rehearsing outcomes it cannot influence, neglecting the present moment where action is actually possible. Epictetus reminded his students that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Distraction turns imagination into a continuous threat generator. Social pressure intensifies under distraction. When attention is constantly directed toward how others live, think, and judge, the mind loses its center. Values become borrowed. Decisions become performative. The Stoics saw this clearly. They warned against living for reputation, because reputation lies outside our control. A distracted culture magnifies reputation into a constant scoreboard, making inner steadiness difficult for those who have not trained for it. The danger is not that distraction makes life unpleasant. It is that it makes people forget what a good life is. Stoicism defines a good life not by comfort, success, or admiration, but by virtue, by the quality of one's judgments, intentions, and actions. Distraction pulls attention away from this inner domain and redirects it toward outcomes and opinions that cannot be secured. To remove distraction is not to become indifferent or isolated. It is to restore proportion. The Stoics did not advocate ignorance. They advocated selectivity. They understood that the mind has limits, and that exhausting it with trivialities leaves it weak when faced with genuine hardship. Inner strength begins with the ability to remain present, to stay with a thought without fleeing into stimulation, to endure boredom without resentment, to feel discomfort without immediately seeking escape. These capacities are not glamorous, but they are foundational. Without them, discipline collapses under pressure. Many people seek confidence, calm, and resilience while continuing to feed the habits that undermine them. This creates frustration. The Stoic path is less forgiving, but more honest. It insists that the state of your mind is a consequence of how you train it. Attention is training. Every moment you surrender without thought, you reinforce weakness. Every moment you reclaim it, you strengthen judgment. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes dyed by its thoughts. In modern terms, it is dyed by what it consumes and how often it is interrupted. A mind constantly interrupted cannot reflect deeply on mortality, responsibility, or purpose. It remains superficial, not by choice, but by conditioning. This is why removing distractions is not a lifestyle trend. It is a philosophical necessity. Without it, Stoic principles remain abstract ideas rather than lived practices. You cannot cultivate rational control while surrendering your attention endlessly. You cannot master emotion while feeding it constant provocation. You cannot live according to nature while ignoring the nature of your own mind. The first act of rebuilding inner strength is therefore an act of refusal. A refusal to be constantly available. A refusal to react to every stimulus. A refusal to treat every impression as urgent. This refusal is not hostility toward the world. It is respect for your own capacity to judge. The Stoics taught that freedom begins within. Not the freedom to do whatever one wants, but the freedom to remain unshaken by what one does not control. Distraction undermines this freedom by binding the mind to external triggers. Remove the triggers, and you begin to see the shape of your own thoughts again. This is uncomfortable at first. Silence exposes restlessness. Stillness reveals impatience. Without distraction, unresolved fears and desires surface. Many people return to noise at this stage, mistaking discomfort for danger. The Stoics would say this is precisely the moment where training begins. Inner strength is not revealed when life is easy and entertaining. It is revealed when the mind is left alone with itself and does not collapse into panic or craving. Distraction postpones this encounter indefinitely. Removal brings it forward. The work is not heroic. It is quiet. It involves choosing fewer inputs, slower rhythms, and deliberate pauses. It involves recognizing that not everything deserves your attention, and that attention given without judgment costs more than it gives. This is the ground on which discipline is rebuilt, not through force, but through clarity, not through withdrawal, but through discernment. When distraction loosens its grip, reason regains its voice, and with reason comes the possibility of steadiness, even in a chaotic world. When distraction loosens its grip, something unfamiliar often appears: responsibility. Without constant noise to blame or hide behind, the mind becomes aware of its own role in suffering. This is not a cause for guilt, but for clarity. Stoicism does not accuse the individual. It instructs that says plainly that peace depends less on what happens and more on how we relate to what happens. At the center of Stoic discipline lies the distinction between what is within our control and what is not. This is not a slogan, it is a demanding standard. For attention to live according to it requires continuous sorting. Each impression must be examined and placed correctly. Is this mine to govern, or is it external? Distraction makes this sorting impossible. Everything feels equally urgent, equally personal, equally threatening. A distracted mind tries to control outcomes. A disciplined mind focuses on conduct. This difference explains much modern anxiety. People exhaust themselves worrying about results that depend on chance, other people's choices, or complex systems. The Stoics warned that tying peace of mind to outcomes is a guaranteed path to disturbance. Fate does not negotiate. Epictetus taught that we should train ourselves to want events to happen as they do happen. This is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not. It is realism. It means aligning desire with reality rather than fighting it. Distraction undermines this alignment by constantly suggesting alternative realities, imagined paths, and hypothetical futures that pull the mind away from what is actually occurring. Fear of the future grows strongest where attention is ungoverned. The mind leaps ahead, constructing scenarios that feel real because they are vividly imagined and constantly reinforced. News cycles, predictions, and endless commentary turn uncertainty into a permanent mental environment. The Stoic response is not denial of risk, but containment of concern. Concern belongs to what can be prepared for. Anxiety attaches itself to what cannot. Inner discipline begins when attention is deliberately returned to the present moment, not as a spiritual exercise, but as a practical one. The present is where judgment operates. It is where effort can be applied. It is where virtue can be practiced. The future, by contrast, is a field of speculation. To live there mentally is to abandon agency. Anger, like fear, reveals confusion about control. Anger arises when expectations collide with reality. Someone behaves unjustly, an institution fails, an outcome disappoints. The Stoics did not excuse wrongdoing, but they insisted that emotional collapse adds no strength to moral response. A distracted mind reacts instantly, inflaming itself with stories of insult and grievance. A disciplined mind pauses long enough to choose proportion. This pause is not suppression. It is judgment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the wrongdoer acts out of ignorance of the good. This perspective does not remove accountability, but it prevents self-destruction. Distraction makes such perspective rare. It shortens the distance between stimulus and reaction until reason is excluded. Social pressure exerts similar force. When attention is scattered, values become porous. The mind absorbs opinions and norms without examining them. It becomes difficult to tell which desires are truly one's own. Stoicism demands independence of judgment, not rebellion, but self-possession. To act according to reason rather than fashion requires the ability to step back from the crowd mentally, even while remaining physically present within society. Removing distractions restores this distance. It allows values to be examined rather than assumed. It exposes how often decisions are driven by fear of exclusion or desire for approval. The Stoics regarded this as a form of dependency incompatible with freedom. If peace depends on being praised or accepted, it rests on unstable ground. Suffering, from a Stoic view, is not only pain or loss, it is also resistance to reality. Much suffering comes from insisting that life should conform to preference. Distraction feeds this insistence by constantly presenting curated images of how life could be easier, fairer, or more satisfying. The mind compares these images to reality and concludes that something is wrong. Stoicism does not deny that hardship exists. It denies that hardship must destroy inner order. When attention is disciplined, suffering is experienced directly, without embellishment. Pain is pain. Loss is loss. They are not multiplied by rumination or comparison. This does not make them pleasant, it makes them survivable. Desire must also be addressed honestly. Many distractions exist to stimulate desire without fulfillment. They promise satisfaction while keeping it just out of reach. The Stoics warned that unexamined desire enslaves the mind. They did not call for the elimination of desire, but for its education. Desire should be directed toward what is stable: character, understanding, and right action. Attachment to externals creates vulnerability. When identity becomes tied to status, possessions, relationships, or outcomes, fear follows naturally. These things are fragile. They can be lost. Distraction intensifies attachment by constantly reminding the mind of what it has and what it lacks. A disciplined mind reduces attachment by remembering impermanence. Mortality sits quietly behind all Stoic practice, not as a threat, but as a guide. Remembering that life is finite clarifies priorities. It strips trivial concerns of their power. Distraction hides mortality behind constant stimulation. It encourages the illusion of endless time. The Stoics considered this illusion dangerous. A person who forgets death forgets to live deliberately. Inner strength grows as the mind becomes accustomed to choosing its focus. This is not accomplished once, but repeatedly. Each moment offers the same choice: to be pulled outward or to return inward. Control is not gained through dramatic gestures, but through consistency. The Stoics were practical. They did not expect perfection. They expected effort guided by reason, removing distractions does not eliminate difficulty. It makes difficulty intelligible. It allows challenges to be met with proportion rather than panic. When attention is reclaimed, the mind becomes quieter, but not empty. It becomes capable of sustained thought. It becomes less reactive, more deliberate. This is not withdrawal from responsibility. It is preparation for it. A disciplined mind can face uncertainty without collapse because it knows what remains stable. It can endure injustice without losing integrity because it knows what belongs to it and what does not. It can accept impermanence without despair because it has already loosened its grip on illusions. This is the work of inner control, not domination of life, but alignment with it. Not emotional numbness, but emotional order. Distraction is the great enemy of this order because it prevents the mind from seeing clearly. Remove it, and the essential questions reappear. What depends on me? What is worth my concern? How should I act now? These questions do not shout, they wait. When the noise subsides, they can finally be heard. When attention is steadied and the boundary of control is understood, the task that remains is practice. Stoicism is not a philosophy of insight alone. It is a philosophy of training. Inner strength is not discovered once and kept forever. It is maintained through habits that shape how the mind meets each day. The Stoics emphasized voluntary discipline because they understood how easily comfort weakens judgment. When life offers constant ease, the mind becomes unprepared for straying. This is why they practiced voluntary discomfort, not as punishment, but as calibration, to occasionally choose less, to endure mild hardship without complaint, reminds the mind that it is capable of more than it fears. Modern life encourages constant comfort. Temperature, entertainment, convenience, and distraction cushion every moment. While none of these are evil, dependence on them is dangerous. When discomfort inevitably arrives, as it always does, the untrained mind reacts with panic or resentment. The trained mind recognizes discomfort as familiar terrain. Rebuilding inner strength means learning to remain composed when things are withheld. When things are withheld, when attention is not immediately rewarded, when effort does not produce praise. These moments test whether discipline is internal or dependent on external reinforcement. Stoicism insists on the former. Daily reflection is essential. Marcus Aurelius wrote his thoughts not for an audience, but to correct his own judgments. Reflection allows the mind to review its reactions without self-contempt. Where did impatience arise? Where did fear exaggerate threat? Where did desire overstep its bounds? This is not moral accounting. It is adjustment. Silence plays a critical role here. Not total silence, but intentional quiet. Without it, reflection is crowded out. The Stoics did not require withdrawal from society, but they did require time away from noise. Inner order cannot be built while the mind is constantly interrupted. Impermanence must be contemplated deliberately. Everything that can be lost will be lost. This is not pessimism. It is realism. To remember this daily is to soften attachment before it hardens into dependency. When loss arrives, it hurts less, not because one feels less, but because one expected as part of nature. Preparation for loss extends to the self. Health, strength, reputation, and even mental clarity are not guaranteed. Stoicism teaches gratitude without clinging, to enjoy what is present while knowing it is temporary. This balance is difficult. Distraction undermines it by encouraging constant accumulation and denial of endings. Ego must also be restrained. Ego feeds on attention. It seeks validation, dominance, and recognition. When unchecked, it turns life into a performance. Stoic discipline reduces ego by shifting focus from how one appears to how one acts. Virtue requires no audience. It is sufficient in itself. Injustice is unavoidable in human affairs. The Stoic does not ignore it, but refuses to become corrupted by it. To respond with integrity, the mind must be stable. Distraction makes injustice feel omnipresent and personal. Discipline restores proportion. One acts where one can, accepts where one must, and preserves character above all. Mortality remains the final teacher. Remembering death is not meant to darken life, but to sharpen it. Time wasted on distraction is time not lived. The Stoics urged themselves to act as if each day were a complete life. Not rushed, but complete. Attention given deliberately is the measure of such a life. Inner strength does not announce itself. It appears as patience under pressure, clarity in confusion, restraint in provocation. These qualities are invisible to many, but unmistakable to the one who possesses them. They arise not from temperament, but from training. The modern world will not become quieter. Demand will increase. Information will multiply. The Stoic response is not resistance through force, but stability through discipline. To stand firm while the world moves is not detachment, it is mastery. Rebuilding inner strength is a lifelong practice. Some days will be scattered, others will be clear. Progress is not linear. The Stoics accepted this without discouragement. They measured success by effort aligned with reason, not by flawless control. To remove distractions is to create space. In that space, judgment matures, values clarify, action becomes deliberate. This is not a retreat from responsibility, but the foundation for meeting it well. A calm and resilient mind is not a gift bestowed by circumstance. It is the result of attention governed, desire educated, and fear contained. In a chaotic world, this form of strength remains available to anyone willing to practice restraint. The work is quiet. It will not be celebrated. It will not trend, but it will hold when everything else shifts. Inner strength is not something you add to a crowded life. It is what remains when what weakens you is removed. When attention is no longer scattered, when desire is no longer constantly provoked, when fear is no longer rehearsed, the mind returns to a natural steadiness. This steadiness does not promise comfort, it promises clarity, and clarity is enough to live well. The Stoics did not seek to escape the world. They sought to meet it without losing themselves. They accepted that life is uncertain, that injustice exists, that loss is unavoidable, and that death is near. None of this was meant to burden the mind. It was meant to free it from illusion. When you stop demanding guarantees, you stop being hostage to chance. Removing distractions is an act of respect toward your own capacity to judge, endure, and act. It is a choice to live deliberately rather than reactively. Not every moment will be calm. Not every decision will be perfect. Stoicism never promised that. It offered something more durable, the ability to remain upright when conditions are not favorable. A disciplined mind does not require constant reassurance. It knows what belongs to it. It invests effort where effort matters and releases concern where it does not. Over time, this produces a quiet confidence that does not depend on outcomes or applause. This path is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is walked in ordinary moments, through ordinary choices, repeated daily. The world will continue to demand your attention. You will decide how much of it you give. If these reflections are useful to you, continue the practice. Return to them when the noise grows loud again. This channel exists to support that work, not to distract from it. If you choose to stay, do so with intention. Inner strength is rebuilt slowly, but once restored, it carries you through whatever follows.